Edward Harrison was a man who had lived several lives in one lifetime. At 72, with neatly combed silver hair and an aura of authority, he was both feared and admired in the world of business. His empire stretched from Wall Street to Silicon Valley. His name opened doors in Washington and closed deals in London. But none of it filled the void left behind by his son's disappearance nearly 2 decades earlier. Michael, just 12 years old at the time, had vanished after a bitter divorce with Edward's ex-wife. She had moved Michael away from Chicago, cutting Edward out of the boy's life. A year later, a tragic car accident was reported to have taken both mother and child. Edward had been told to move on, but he never believed the story fully. Somewhere inside, he felt his son's story wasn't over. Now, on a cloudy afternoon in Chicago, Edward stepped into one of his lesser-known distribution warehouses. He wore a simple navy suit and no entourage, no bodyguards, no aides, just himself. The board thought he was there to inspect conditions. The truth was simpler. Edward wanted to feel something real again. Away from the lies of boardrooms, away from the polished speeches, he longed to hear the hum of forklifts, the chatter of working-class voices, and the smell of sweat and machinery. As he walked past rows of workers lifting crates and checking manifests, Edward felt invisible. Nobody recognized the billionaire. And for once, he liked it. Edward's steps slowed near the loading dock. That's when he saw him. A young black man, no older than 21, hauling boxes twice his size, with a determination that drew attention. His name tag read, Jordan Brooks. His uniform was worn, and his boots scuffed. But there was a strength in his movements that spoke of discipline. Edward's gaze locked on Jordan's face. His breath hitched. It was impossible, but the resemblance was undeniable. Jordan had the same deep brown eyes as Michael, the same defined jawline, even the same way of furrowing his brow when focusing. Edward's chest tightened. It felt like he was staring through a time portal, like Michael had been reborn in front of him. The world around Edward blurred. The sounds of the warehouse dulled. All he could hear was the echo of Michael's laughter from long ago, the image of a small boy riding his bike down their mansion's driveway, turning to shout, "Watch me, Dad!" Edward's lips parted, his voice barely a whisper. "Michael?" Jordan noticed the strange man staring at him. He paused, wiping sweat from his brow, confused. "Everything okay, sir?" he asked politely, though his tone carried the guardedness of someone used to being judged. Edward shook his head quickly, snapping out of his trance. He turned away, embarrassed, but his heart was pounding. Jordan Brooks had grown up on the south side of Chicago. Life for him had never been easy. Raised by his grandmother, Miss Lillian, he often felt like life had already decided his worth before he had a chance to prove himself. At school, teachers assumed he was lazy or a troublemaker before he opened his mouth. He remembered one teacher in 8th grade telling him, "Boys like you don't make it to college." Be realistic. He was only 13. At stores, clerks followed him down aisles, whispering as if his skin alone made him a suspect. Even now, in the warehouse, he sometimes caught his white co-workers exchanging smirks when he walked past. They didn't know his story. They didn't know that every dollar he earned went to his grandmother, who worked as a seamstress until her hands gave out. Still, Jordan carried himself with pride. His grandmother had raised him with discipline, telling him, "Baby, you may not have much, but you gon' have dignity. Don't let nobody take that from you. What Jordan didn't know was the secret Miss Lillian carried in her heart, the truth about his bloodline. That night, Edward returned to his penthouse. The view from the 50th floor overlooked the glittering Chicago skyline. Usually, the sight gave him a sense of power. Tonight, it gave him nothing. He poured himself a glass of scotch and sat in the dark. All he could see in his mind was Jordan's face. The resemblance was uncanny. He couldn't shake it. He pulled out an old photo of Michael, at age 12, his arms slung around a golden retriever in their garden. Side by side, Michael and Jordan could have been twins. Edward's mind spiraled. Could it be? No. Michael would be in his 30s now. This boy is too young. But what if the accident story wasn't true? What if his hand trembled as he sipped the drink. For decades, he had lived with guilt. Had he failed Michael as a father? Had his obsession with business driven his family away? Was this boy some cruel trick of fate, or was it destiny pulling him toward the truth? By dawn, Edward made a decision. He hired a private investigator, giving only one instruction: find out everything about Jordan Brooks. Meanwhile, Jordan returned home late, exhausted from his shift. His grandmother, Miss Lillian, was waiting at the small kitchen table, her Bible open beside her. "You're late, baby," she said gently. "Don't forget, tomorrow you got that interview for the supervisor role." Jordan sighed, rubbing his shoulders. "Yeah, Grandma, but you know how it is. They'll probably give it to somebody else, somebody who don't look like me." Her eyes softened with sadness. She had seen too many young black men crushed by systems designed against them. But she also knew secrets Jordan didn't. Secrets about his past. Secrets that connected him to a man he had never met. When Jordan asked again about his parents that night, why they weren't around, why nobody talked about them, Miss Lillian's hands shook as she closed her Bible. "Not tonight, baby." Some stories hurt too much. Jordan went to bed restless, staring at the ceiling. He had always felt like a piece of his story was missing. Tonight, that emptiness weighed heavier than ever. Edward Harrison couldn't focus at work. His boardroom meetings blurred. His advisors noticed his distraction, but none dared question it. In his private thoughts, Edward kept replaying Jordan's face. Jordan Brooks, on the other hand, pushed through another long shift, unaware that a billionaire had taken a dangerous interest in him. One man searching for redemption, the other searching for identity. Two worlds, divided by race, wealth, and history, were about to collide. And when the truth surfaced, it wouldn't just shake their lives. It would expose buried lies, ignite old wounds of racism, and force both men to question everything they believed about family, loyalty, and justice. 2 weeks later, Edward Harrison sat in his office overlooking the skyline, his nerves taut as the private investigator slid a folder across the mahogany desk. "Everything you asked for, Mr. Harrison. Jordan Brooks, 21 years old, works at your warehouse, part-time at a car repair shop on weekends, lives with his grandmother, Miss Lillian Brooks, in South Chicago. Never knew his parents. Records say his mother died when he was a baby. No official records of his father. Edward's brow furrowed. No father?" The investigator nodded. The grandmother raised him alone. Good reputation in the community, very respected. But the boy, he's had it rough. Teachers dismissed him. Opportunities blocked. You know how it is for black families in this city, especially on that side of town. Edward's hand tightened on the folder. As he flipped through Jordan's photos, School records, employment history, even a grainy driver's license. His heart pounded. No father, a mother who vanished, a grandmother holding all the secrets. Edward whispered under his breath, "Could he be mine?" That same week, Edward returned to the warehouse, but this time he dressed down. A plain jacket, jeans, and a baseball cap. He wanted to see Jordan without the weight of his billionaire identity. Jordan was on break, sitting at the edge of the loading dock, eating a sandwich out of a paper bag. His co-workers were nearby, laughing and joking, but he sat apart, quiet. Edward approached cautiously. "Mind if I sit?" Jordan glanced up, wary. Sure." Edward lowered himself beside him, watching the young man carefully. "You work hard," Edward said. "I've seen you around." "You remind me of someone I used to know." Jordan shrugged. "Yeah, well, I just do what I can. People already expect me to fail, you know." His voice carried a mix of defiance and sadness. "If I slack off, they'll just say, 'Typical.'" Edward's chest tightened. The bitterness in Jordan's words echoed decades of prejudice. "That's not fair," he said softly. Jordan chuckled bitterly. "Fair? Sir, I was born black in South Chicago. Life doesn't really come with fair." For a moment, Edward didn't know how to respond. He wanted to tell him everything, about Michael, about the resemblance, about the gnawing suspicion in his chest, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he just nodded and said, "You're stronger than you know." Jordan looked at him strangely, as if trying to understand why this stranger cared so much. The next day, the warehouse buzzed with gossip. Some of Jordan's white co-workers mocked him openly. "Hey, Brooks," one sneered, "saw you chatting with that old guy yesterday. You trying to get special treatment?" Another laughed. "Yeah, maybe he's your long-lost daddy." The group erupted in laughter. Jordan clenched his fists, but said nothing. He was used to it. Used to being underestimated, mocked, dismissed. But this time, the words hit different. Because deep down, something about the old man's gaze had unsettled him too. That night he asked Miss Lillian again, "Grandma, why don't I know anything about my father? Every time I ask, you shut me down. I'm grown now. I deserve to know." Miss Lillian froze, her frail hands trembling over her teacup. "Baby," she whispered, "some truths. They're heavier than you realize. And once you open that door, you can't close it again." Jordan's frustration boiled. "So I'm just supposed to live my whole life not knowing who I am?" Tears welled in her eyes. She reached across the table and gripped his hand. "You'll know when the time is right. But until then, trust me. Please." Meanwhile, Edward paced his penthouse like a restless ghost. His mind was consumed with Jordan. He replayed every word of their conversation, every look, every gesture. The resemblance to Michael wasn't just physical, it was in his spirit, his resilience, his quiet strength. But doubt gnawed at Edward. Could it be true? Could his ex-wife have lied about Michael's death? Could Jordan be his grandson, or even his son? If Jordan was his blood, Edward had failed him in the worst way. While Edward had dined in luxury, Jordan had grown up struggling, facing prejudice Edward had never endured. The guilt was suffocating. A week later, Edward decided to test Jordan. Quietly, he arranged for Jordan to be promoted to supervisor for a trial week, without telling him who had pulled the strings. Jordan was stunned when the warehouse manager announced it. "Me? Supervisor?" He looked around, suspicious. Some workers smirked. "Figures. Play the race card long enough." They'll hand you the job." Others muttered, "Affirmative action at its finest." Jordan ignored them, but their words stung. He threw himself into the role, working harder than ever. He stayed late, fixed schedules, even helped his team finish tasks instead of barking orders. But at night he lay awake, wondering, why me? Who's behind this? One evening, as Jordan left the warehouse, Edward appeared again, waiting near the exit. "Rough day?" Edward asked. Jordan narrowed his eyes. "You keep showing up. Why?" "Who are you, really?" Edward hesitated. The truth burned in his throat, but fear held him back. "I'm someone who believes in you," he said carefully. "More than you know." Jordan shook his head, frustrated. "Yeah, well, belief doesn't pay the bills. Belief doesn't change the way people look at me when I walk into a store. Belief doesn't erase the fact that I've been busting my back while rich men sit in their glass towers deciding what crumbs we get." Edward's chest ached, because Jordan's anger wasn't wrong. It was the anger of generations, the anger of injustice Edward had never faced. He wanted to scream, "I'm not one of them, I'm your blood." But he couldn't. Not yet. Instead, he simply said, "One day soon, Jordan, you'll see that not everything is as it seems." Jordan stared at him, confused, before walking away. At home, Miss Lillian sat alone, clutching a faded photograph of Edward's ex-wife, the woman who had once been her closest friend. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered to herself, "Lord, how much longer can I keep this truth buried?" Because she knew exactly who Jordan's father was, and she knew that the truth would tear open wounds of race, betrayal, and power that had been festering for decades. Meanwhile, Edward stared out over the city lights, whispering to the night sky, "Michael, if this boy is yours, then I will not fail him. Not again. 2 families. 2 secrets." And the collision was coming closer. Edward couldn't hold it in any longer. After weeks of shadowing Jordan, of watching him battle racism, mockery, and life's weight, he decided the truth had to come out. He sent a quiet invitation through the warehouse manager. Dinner at Harrison Estate. Friday night, Jordan almost crumpled the note in anger. "Why me? I'm not some charity case," he muttered. But Miss Lillian's reaction was different. Her hands trembled when she read the name. "Harrison," she whispered, nearly dropping the note. Jordan frowned. "You know him?" Miss Lillian looked away, her eyes filled with ghosts of the past. "Baby, if you go, promise me you'll keep your heart open. Because this dinner, it's not just about food, it's about truth." Friday night, Jordan walked into the Harrison mansion, his jaw tightening at the sight of marble floors and crystal chandeliers. He couldn't ignore the stares from the servants, mostly white, who eyed him as though he didn't belong. Their whispers cut into him. "Who's he? Wrong address, maybe. Mr. Harrison must be getting desperate." Jordan's fists clenched. The wealth, the power. It felt like a world built to remind him he was on the outside looking in. Then Edward entered. The moment his eyes landed on Jordan, he froze. It was like Michael had walked back into the room after 25 years. They sat at a long oak table, plates of untouched food between them. Jordan's guard was up, suspicion radiating off him. Edward cleared his throat. "Jordan, there's a reason I asked you here. Something I've been avoiding for too long." Jordan leaned back, arms crossed. "Then say it." "'Cause I don't play games," Edward's voice cracked. "I believe you are my grandson." The words hung in the air like thunder. Jordan laughed, a bitter, disbelieving laugh. "What?" Is this some sick joke? Some rich man's fantasy of saving the poor black kid? Edward shook his head fiercely. No, I'm telling you the truth. Your father, Michael Harrison, he was my son. Jordan's breath caught, but his face hardened. That's impossible. My grandma told me my mother raised me alone. At that moment the doors creaked open, and Miss Lillian entered, her cane tapping against the polished floor. Tears glistened in her eyes. It's not impossible, baby, she said softly. It's the truth I should have told you long ago. Jordan turned on her, his voice raw. Grandma, you knew. All this time, Miss Lillian sobbed. I did what I thought was best. Your mama, she fell in love with Michael Harrison. But his family, they never accepted her. She was black. They told her she'd ruin the Harrison name. They drove her away. Edward buried his face in his hands. God forgive me. I let them drive her away. I let them tell me my son was dead. I believed their lies, because it was easier than facing the truth. Jordan's world tilted. His whole life, he'd been searching for answers, and now they poured out like poison and medicine all at once. Jordan shot up from the table, his chair screeching. So what? You show up now, after 21 years, with your billions and your guilt, and I'm supposed to just, what, hug you? Call you Grandpa? Edward stood too, desperate. No, I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know who you are. You're not nothing, Jordan. You're not what this world has told you. You are a Harrison Jordan. Shook his head, rage and pain boiling over. A Harrison? You mean the same name that stood by while my mama died in poverty? The same name that left my grandma to raise me alone while your family sat in mansions? Miss Lillian wept. Baby, please, don't let their hate define you. But Jordan's voice thundered back, their hate already did. Every look, every job I got passed over for, every time someone called me less, that was their legacy to me. Edward, his face streaked with tears, pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside was a silver locket with a photo of Michael, Jordan's father. Jordan froze. He had seen that face before, his own face staring back. He snatched the locket, his chest heaving. His walls cracked, but his anger didn't fade. You should have fought for him. For us, Edward sank to his knees, sobbing. I failed my son. I failed you. But if there's any mercy left in this world, let me make it right. Let me give you what should have been yours all along. Edward revealed a sealed envelope and slid it across the table. In my will, everything comes to you, the Harrison fortune, the legacy that was stolen from you and your mother. Not out of pity, out of justice. Jordan stared at it, his hands trembling. For the first time, he saw not just wealth, but power. The power to rewrite the story his family had tried to bury. But inside, his heart was torn. Accepting it meant stepping into the very world that had rejected him. Jordan looked at Miss Lillian, her eyes pleading. Then at Edward, broken and desperate. Finally he spoke, his voice steady. I'll take what's mine. But not for you, for her, for my mama. For every time I was told I'd never be more than the color of my skin. If I'm going to carry the Harrison name, I'm going to make sure it stands for something better than what you left behind. Edward sobbed with relief, while Miss Lillian whispered a prayer of thanks. Jordan walked out of the mansion that night, not as a broken boy, but as a man with a name, a history, and a fire to turn his pain into power.